I'm Peter Underwood, this is News from the Water. Are reasonable adjustments unreasonable? There are hundreds of boaters with a disability of some sort, and the Equality Act says organisations like Canal and River Trust, the Environment Agency and other navigation authorities have a duty to make reasonable adjustments if those boaters are placed at a substantial disadvantage because of their disability. Which sounds wonderful and fair and just, but it isn't that simple. Adjustments only have to be made if it's reasonable to do so, and that part of the Act gives several escape clauses. What's a reasonable thing to ask for depends on how practicable the changes are, the size of the organisation and how much money it has, even the cost of making those changes. A dispute between one disabled boater on the River Trent and Canal and River Trust, which has just gone through the Trust's often questioned ombudsman procedures, provides a clear example of the difficulties a disabled boater is faced with in challenging CRT's decisions on what is a reasonable adjustment. Stuart Tyler fought a 3-year battle with CRT and has, in the end, been left with no option but to sell his boat. He hasn't given up, however, and is planning to make both CRT and the Trust's Ombudsman Sarah Daniel the subjects of complaints to higher authorities. He says,
I am determined to ensure, whatever happens, that in future Canal and River Trust will carry out properly recognised equality adjustments, based on disabled boaters' needs and access to the facilities.
Stuart claims CRT is both unwilling and unable to deal with disabled boaters and says that the Ombudsman process should be completely independent of the Trust. Stuart, who's 72, uses 2 crutches to walk and has a degenerative breathing condition. As a result, he needs not just an accessible mooring when he's travelling, but one with the ability to park his car within a few metres, and that's especially true in winter. He's argued that home lock on the Trent is the only mooring suitable for a disabled boater on the entire river, and that he shouldn't have to move until CRT could provide a suitable alternative. His doctor supported that view, but CRT has argued that other legislation trumps the Equality Act. Things came to a head when CRT offered an adjustment, as they call it, that Stuart could remain at home lock for 28 days and at Gunthorpe for 7 days with 16 kilometres distance of travel. He says he didn't accept that, and he made that clear because he was unable to adhere to those rules. The Trust claims there was what they call implicit agreement. At the heart of CRT's argument was the assertion that the provisions of the British Waterways Act overrule the Equality Act. The Trust says it has a duty to ensure that boaters are compliant with their licence conditions. But when someone's unable to comply for a prolonged period because of a disability, there are no other options open to them. And although CRT says each case is assessed on its own merits, it's clear that not moving is simply unacceptable. And the Ombudsman says,
I do accept that he has genuine difficulties in managing his disability, and that he may be unable to do things which other people would take for granted. The Trust does have certain obligations in respect of people with disabilities, but those obligations are not limitless, and it does not seem to me that the Trust has failed to do anything it could reasonably be expected to do, or that it has acted inappropriately.
She also ventures a little gentle criticism of CRT.
I am satisfied the Trust has in place policies and procedures for the assessment of the needs of a disabled boater. However, there are some areas which could be improved and provide a more open and transparent experience for the boater.
She fails to address the issue of conflict between the continuous cruising element of the British Waterways Act and the Equality Act, and seems to accept CRT's interpretation by default. Stewart has now been forced by his conditions and what he sees as CRT's intransigence in making proper provisions to move into onshore-based accommodation and sell his vessel. But he's planning to buy another one and to carry on the fight, especially over the provision of what he sees as proper disabled moorings that combine a level and accessible bank with adjacent parking, something he wants to see across the system. Now, CRT has consistently avoided specific disabled moorings, perhaps because they would have to meet an appropriate standard and rely instead on identifying moorings which might be suitable for boaters with disabilities. At a recent online meeting of the Trust's Disabled Boaters Forum, Rachel Hayward said the Trust was auditing and cataloguing accessibility at short stay visitor moorings and aimed to add that information to the online maps with photos of the moorings and information such as towpath surface, whether there are rings or bollards, access to car parking and toilets. But Matthew Simmons, boating officer, made it clear nothing was going to happen quickly, with CRT only now looking at signage and no budget for work until the next financial year. Now that reflects Stuart Tyler's frustration, and he insists there's still a complete lack of comprehension or willingness to address the real issues: reserved, disabled moorings that provide parking and other facilities available across the system. Accountable or impervious to criticism? As the usual annual boaters survey starts its rounds, asking what boaters think of CRT, it's worthwhile thinking about just how accountable the Trust is and to whom. It's difficult to avoid concluding that nobody really wants to take a good hard look at Canal and River Trust. The Department for Food and Environment and Rural Affairs is meant to be reviewing the first decade of the Trust's existence, but it's about to change the civil servant in charge of that review for the third time in a few months, having failed to find the funds for external experts to do the job. And my colleague Alan Richards points out that 10 weeks after his complaint, and despite CRT's admission that it had filed a falsified report, that fake report continues to be displayed on the Charity Commission website. That's the same Charity Commission that's meant to be investigating CRT's cheating. At the same time, no action has been taken against those named as conspiring to falsify the annual report, and Alan says the failure to take action may be related to private meetings between the board and Chief Exec Richard Parry, which are not minuted. Some sources at a senior level within CRT suggest that board members may have urged the Chief Executive to do whatever was necessary to get a good outcome from the DEFRA review. Alan has written to the board asking them to respond to that claim. But of course, key changes made in the annual report were there to hide a large fall in the condition of CRT's heritage properties, and the National Association of Boat Owners has taken up the cudgels over the continuing sales of canal-side properties started by British Waterways. It says that although a recent Freedom of Information request asking how many listed buildings have already been sold was denied, seasoned boaters and canal enthusiasts could easily compile a list of exceptional buildings that have already been sold off, to the absolute detriment of the UK's historic and unique canal system. In fact, so much has been sold that the reality is that only the really iconic properties are now left, and so they too have become threatened. Two recent examples that illustrate CRT's lack of care towards the heritage they're supposed to be cherishing are the Stop House at Braunston and the Toll House at Pontymoyle. How shameful, says Nabo, that the campaign group Save Britain's Heritage felt it could add the iconic Stop House to its at-risk register. Nabo points out that CRT is obliged by their charitable objectives and the DEFRA grant agreement to conserve the UK's canal heritage for the future, not sell it all off to the highest bidder. They say Chief Executive Richard Parry's assertion that CRT finds private owners who will give the properties the care they need is simply disingenuous. And they're not reassured by the recent appointment of a new heritage advisory group after 4 years of not having one. The last group was ignored and disbanded, and this new group has not had a single meeting since being created in April. Nabo says our historic canal system and associated structures are regarded as a jewel in the UK's crown, but sadly it's being slowly dismantled and what's left barely maintained, with the waterways being transformed into a nationwide footpath and cycle track. Nabo is clear it is such a short-term policy to sell off everything possible, and asks what CRT will do for funds when it's all gone and the UK's unique waterways heritage is finally exhaustively plundered. They say the whole nation should be alarmed at what is happening, not just boaters, canal enthusiasts and historians. The status of this uniquely British waterway system in its entirety needs to be elevated to a national asset, they say. It needs to be recognised as the national waterways of rare and special importance to our country's inheritance. And a good example of the lack of commitment from CRT is tragically illustrated by the fact that property director Stuart Mills was holding up Selby Lockhouse as an example of CRT's commitment to restoring and maintaining canal heritage in the Staff magazine back in 2015, only for CRT to sell it by auction this year. Does green have to be extreme? Whilst government, local councils in London and CRT turn the air green with largely theoretical plans for electric boats, charging points and silent cruising, two key waterways organisations have embraced a different reality. The National Association of Boat Owners and the Inland Waterways Association have recognised that any solution needs to be affordable and available for boaters. A general ban on diesel, red or white, would make moving, heating, cooking and electrical generation impossible, even for boats with hybrid systems which still have diesel generation to top up their batteries away from power points. Nabo says an all-electric future is not, in its view, really feasible on the canals without a huge investment in the infrastructure. And Nabo is putting its support behind the adoption of HVO, hydro-treated vegetable oil, as a direct cleaner replacement for diesel fuel. This is a second-generation biofuel that is much more eco-friendly than the first mineral version and will allow conventional and hybrid boats to keep operating without substantial changes and investment by their owners. The IWA has come to the same conclusion and allied itself with commercial operators who still want to sell and use the diesel replacement. This second-generation biofuel is now becoming readily available and is more than 90% carbon neutral. And the IWA says it looks like being a drop-in replacement fuel for those keen to run their existing diesel engines into a carbon neutral future. Hydro-treated vegetable oil is completely stable when stored, remains free-flowing down to at least minus 25 degrees C, and doesn't attract water, so nothing to encourage the growth of diesel bug. IWA says it started a conversation with CRT to explore the place that HVO will occupy in their position paper on sustainable boating. Going forward, it says IWA will be pressing for greater use of HVO on our waterways, although availability of the fuel is still limited in the UK. It says it's working with fuel companies, existing users and potential outlets to raise its overall profile. One of the most exciting initiatives on the HVO front is the fuel boat Barnet. It's just started trading on London's waterways following an extensive refit. With the exception of the Thames Tideway, Barnet is the first fuel boat to sell HVO. The London Water Bus Company will be among its new customers. Together with the Commercial Boat Owners Association, IWA will also be campaigning to level the price playing field between mineral diesel and HVO and encouraging the general uptake of this fuel on the inland waterways. Some good news to finish with. That's all for this week. Cheerio.
We need video and photos of all aspects of the waterways. Email files to peterunderwood2@gmail.com with your name and a brief description of it and where and when it was shot.